Stanford University.
So I'm really excited that Bill Draper is kicking off our series this quarter, since we're focused, the theme for this year for the course is venture capital from past to present, and I can't think of a better speaker to kick off the entire session. So Bill Draper, the name Draper, is very common and well known within Silicon Valley. Mr. Draper himself came to work at a venture capital firm in 1959, so was there very early on. This was his father's venture capital firm. It was the first venture capital firm on the West Coast, and he was an associate there. From there, he went on and ended up starting his own firm and starting many firms from there. So he started Draper & Johnson, as well as Sutter Hill Ventures, which is still very well known today. He spent a little bit of time in public service after that, which I'll dive into in a couple seconds. And then from there, after he came back to Silicon Valley, he founded a number of firms also, Draper Richards being one of them, as well as Draper International, focused on investments in India and being the first venture capital firm to do investments internationally in India, as well as another Draper firm that focused on investments in Europe and China, so has a very international focus in that way. I really admire his dedication to public service as well. So he was president of the Export-Import Bank, working under President Ronald Reagan, as well as he was also the second person, I guess like the second highest ranking person of the United Nations, working on international development projects through that. And then he also has a very well-known foundation within the social entrepreneurship space and funding social entrepreneurs as well. And I think that wasn't enough, but he's also an author, so we all read at least the first part of his book, The Startup Game, in which he discusses a lot of his experiences in entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley. And to top that all off, he has basically 3 or 4 generations of entrepreneurship within his family, starting with his father to his son, Tim Draper. So we recognize the name Draper Fisher Jurgensen, and then his grandson, Adam Draper, who started Boost VC. So very excited to have Mr. Draper here for class today. Thank you.
Good. That was a good introduction, Ernestina. Very clear. That's actually covered most of the talk. Maybe we go right to questions. But the only thing I didn't like was to hear that you've read part of the book, because how could you put it down? I can't believe you. I mean, it's a page turner. Yeah, I came here in 1959 after I had gone to school at Yale and Harvard Business School, and then worked for Inland Steel for 5 years in Silicon Valley. In Chicago, and there was a town there called East Chicago, Indiana, which is right outside of Chicago, across the border of Illinois and Indiana. And I met Pitch Johnson there, who was working in the mill, and I was in a training program, and then later was a salesman for Inland Steel. And they only had 9 salesmen. It's the 6th largest steel company in the country. Now they don't make a pound of steel in the United States because they just, the union would go on strike. The white-collar workers would all wait for the strike to be over, and everybody would get a 6% raise or a 9% raise, whatever it was that was finally negotiated. And the negotiation wasn't very hard because everybody benefited who was on a salary. And of course, we priced ourselves out of the market, and an Indian firm bought Inland Steel, and U.S. Steel closed up, and they were in Gary, Indiana, right next door. And so one of the lessons I learned was you gotta stay competitive. And so one of the first questions I asked when I got into venture capital was, I asked various entrepreneurs, is, okay, what do you know about the competition? And a lot of times they will have a general feel for the competition, But the entrepreneur's biggest mistake, I think, is not thoroughly knowing what's in the back room and what is available, what will be available in 3 years, and how far ahead he or she is going to be if their product gets distributed. Another thing I look for, well, let me tell you characteristics of that I look for in an entrepreneur. I want to make sure that they have done their homework in looking into the competition, looking into the market. Many of them misjudge how hard it is to reach the market. They say, this is a huge market. If we can just get 1/10 of 1% of that market, you'll make a lot of money on your $2 million investment. But what they don't realize is how difficult it is to reach that market. And so that is important. It's often a couple of technical people that start up a company, and they downplay the importance of marketing or sales. If it's a couple of marketing people, they downplay the importance of technology. We had one that, that they were going to make a much better product than what was available already in Mexico. And they were going to, sell tons and tons of this. As it turned out, their product didn't work, and we had to use the Mexican product and sell that because we already had a sales force. So obviously we didn't make much money on that deal. We look for energy, good education like you guys are getting, brain power, back to energy. I mean, you can see it. Sometimes you can tell just walking to the bathroom with a guy whether he's energetic or not. Of course, if he's in a hurry, there are all kinds of reasons. But brain power, energy, certain amount of creativity, and an empathy. I always say empathy, and then, the first chance they get and raising a question, well, you said empathy. What about Steve Jobs? He didn't have any empathy. But the truth is, he had great empathy for the customer. And he put himself in the shoes of the customer, and if it wasn't smooth, and if it wasn't thin, and if it wasn't lightweight, get that shit back in the drawing room, and you engineers give me what I want. So empathy is very important, but typically I mean to empathizing with the customer, the client, the supplier, or the employee that you're in charge of. And you put yourself in those shoes, it makes your negotiating position much better. And it's hard to do that because you've got your thing and you want them to sign up, and you want to make sure that you get all your points across. But the truth is, one of the easiest ways to really do a good negotiation is to just put yourself on the other side of the table and say, now, if I were him, what would I want, and what would I settle for, and what do I have to lose in this kind of a deal, and what do I have to gain? Another characteristic is the sensitivity to other people's feelings. So, I guess overall I'd bunch it saying good human relations and ability to put a team together. And then again, you say, well, what about Steve Jobs? And I agree, he's an exception. But typically, you want a CEO who is going to be able to put a good team together, attract very fine people, whether it's in his territory of sales or engineering or whatever his territory is, or even outside that. And then you want to ask some questions, like I said, you know, what's the competition? What about your, well, how much is it going to take you to get from here to there? And very often, the numbers are rather underestimated, because typically if they're the engineering team making those guesses, they underestimate the marketing costs. And if they're marketing or sales people that are in charge, they typically underestimate the engineering costs. They think, oh, that can be done, you know, pretty easily. And of course, it always takes more. So we very often just double or triple whatever is requested. And then another thing that we dig in on is, have you ever had a leadership position before? And so let's say they're straight out of college, and that's not bad, because it happens, you know. Some of the best companies in the area have been people that left college and started. Steve Jobs is one of them, and started some great companies. So young is good, but often inexperienced, and they'll say, well, no, you know, but they might say, well, I was president of my fraternity, or I put in a group together that did some social work in the town, or something. Anyway, I look for something that shows some kind of leadership competence. If that's all missing, and this guy is brilliant, and I say, well, you know, maybe we better get somebody else to help you in your saddle, and let's get somebody that complements you, and then the reaction to that is often, you know, I guess I'll go see another VC, or but usually they'll respond that that's okay with them, and it helps a lot. So it was mentioned that we started a social entrepreneur foundation. It's really venture capital for social entrepreneurs. And there's a guy named John, the organization is called Room to Read. And the guy that started it, John Woods, was at Microsoft, and he was hiking up in Nepal, and he was up on the top of a mountain, and he saw a bunch of kids, and they weren't in school during school hours, and he said, well, where do they go to school? There's no school up here. They can't get down the mountain, up another mountain to school and home for dinner, so they don't go to school. So he said he was going to leave Microsoft to focus on building schools in developing countries. Started in Nepal. We gave him at this foundation, Draper Richards Kaplan, it's called. Rob Kaplan teaches at Harvard Business School leadership, and was the vice chairman of Goldman Sachs. Great guy. Robin Richards was my partner when we started that India fund, and we made a lot of money on it, and we were first, and we were lucky. And so that's how this organization, this foundation, started. Anyway, we backed him, John Woods, when he was just by himself in the Presidio, and the question didn't come up at that time about an alter ego or a This guy was a fantastic fundraiser and big personality, and you knew he was going to win. But he had already tied up with a woman who was absolutely fantastic, and she had been working in Vietnam, and she was his co-chairman, really, co-CEO, and because he was a guy who could just mesmerize. You'd all have your checkbooks out. If he were in the room, he'd be raising a hell of a lot of money. But the pieces, had to be picked up as he left the room. And she was the one that could do that very, very well. Now she is the CEO of Room to Read, and he has left and just calls himself founder and money man or something like that. And he's still raising money, but he doesn't have anything to do with the management of the place. I'll tell you a little story about that, about my own decision making. It was pretty interesting. I went to see him, and Jenny Schilling-Stein, who graduated from here, went with me and said to him, she had been in touch with him on the phone, and she had said on the phone, Bill would like to see your business plan. And he said, oh, fine. And he hung up and he said, business plan? He had no business plan. He just knew he needed, I don't know, whatever we get. We gave him $300,000. That's what we do for everybody. We give everybody the same thing, $300,000, a lot of coaching and bringing them together once a year and meeting outside wherever they are. We're all across the country. And then we leave them at the end of 3 years. But he when we got there, I said, well, what's this sleeping bag doing in the, rolled up next to the wall? And he said, well, sometimes, we work late and it's better to sleep here because we have an early morning meeting. I said, hey, Jenny, this is the kind of guy we want. We're going to back him. No, she said, we want to see his business plan. And he said, no, I want you to see my business. He had written it all night. And of course, you know that kind of guy is going to win. He wrote a book, actually, called Leaving Microsoft to Change the World. And that story is in there in the first chapter. So you knew you wanted to back this guy, but you also knew he needed this kind of support that this wonderful woman gave him. And we gave him the first $300,000 commitment, $100 a year for 3 years. He's built 1,700 schools. Wait a minute, he's built 10,000 schools. He's built 17,000 schools in developing countries, India, Nepal, of course, and then a lot of other Asian countries. He's in Latin America and he's in Africa. He's on a budget of $50 million. Last year he raised $50 million. This year he thinks he'll raise 60. And all, people signing a check and saying, be sure you do name that school after my grandmother. Oh yeah, don't worry, we're going to name it after your grandmother. So it works. I mean, if you get the right combination of energy, brain power, and people mix, you get some great companies. And we have been very lucky in that respect. You make some mistakes, and it's, you're bound to do that, but it's well worth the risk. So the venture capital world is really exciting. And if you guys end up there, which I suspect many of you will, it it is fun because you stay in touch with young people and you stay in touch with energetic, creative people. And once in a while, you know, you have a big hit. And then, of course, you take all the credit. You don't give any credit to the entrepreneurs. But the truth is, they're the ones that deserve the 90% of it. But you do have a role to play. So the role to play is as a coach, as a friend, as a support mechanism. You are in there not to say, you know, be critical every board meeting, telling him that he didn't make his plan and you are there to coach him, call him, meet with him before the board meetings so that you know what's going on. The worst mistake entrepreneurs can make, or another bad mistake, is not to tell their board the bad news early. Right away, a good entrepreneur will contact the board and say, we've had some bad news and you ought to hear it right away. Immediately, the board gets into the position of feeling, well, how can I help solve this? Or at least I'm sympathetic to the guy has told me his problem, and poor guy, you know, we've got to try and do something. Instead of not telling him, 2 board meetings go by, and then he didn't solve the problem, it got worse, and the board is mad. So very important to get that bad news out early. Anyway, your job as a venture capitalist is to be sympathetic, helpful, contacts, sharing all your contacts, taking the time. I mean, you're very busy, and you've got a lot of other entrepreneurs to help and to make decisions on some that many that you're not going to do. So it takes a little bit of, God, okay, well, I guess I'll put him in touch with John. You know, I know John's not going to like this, but he might do it, and 10% chance, let's get the 2 of them together. So you've got to be that kind of a personality, a positive force in the company, or you shouldn't be in the venture capital business. A lot of the most successful companies have a unique product, a clear shot at the market, a good team, a brilliant entrepreneur in charge, or a very solid, experienced manager. It could be either of the 2. And a good, and you have a much better shot if you do your homework. So then what does that mean? Well, it means you have asked as many questions as you can in the meeting. And by the way, I'll give you a little history on my side. You know, 1959 is before any of you were born. 59, we started in Draper, Gaither, and Anderson. And my very first deal was with a company called Corbin Farnsworth. And Corbin Farnsworth was basically 2 guys, one named Corbin, as you might have guessed, the other is named Farnsworth. And I said to Farnsworth, Elliot, what is a defibrillator? And he said, well, lie down, Bill, I'll show you. And he and he gets this big paddle out and has a wire, and it's about to plug it into the. I said, no, I think I get it. This is so it was the very first defibrillator, heart starter upper, that was ever done in the country. Externally, up to that time, this is 1959 or early 60, they slit your chest open and put like a pacemaker inside and zipped you up again. But this was the first external defibrillator, and well, God, it's, you know, made us a lot of money. It happened to be my very first deal, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. But mostly, I was lucky to just get to know this little team, and the thing that I look back on is not that we made a lot of money on it, but that it has saved so many lives. So when you do venture capital and health programs, it's kind of a double positive. There are others. One we backed, when I started Sutter Hill, we had a whole bunch of people coming in, different things, and one of the companies that we backed designed the PSA test. And when you get to be 40 years old, the men only, get this PSA test for prostate cancer. I had the test and I had prostate cancer. So not only does it save a lot of other lives, but it's pretty important to me personally because I got out of that whole problem. And so what you take away years later, and I'm telling you this because it's interesting to know what I remember early days. What you take away is how much good you've done, not necessarily how much money you've made. One other example, I had nothing to do with my very best deal, which I did reasonably well in, call it 2005. And I was with a guy named Howard Hartenbaum. And I was out of Sutter Hill. I'd gone to Washington for those Export-Import Bank and the UN. And I was away for 12 years. When I came back, I started up with this gal, the India Fund. But then we also had this fellow, Hartenbaum, and we did just normal deals that are local. But then I thought, this guy is, running up against a buzzsaw, because by the time I got back here, it was a very competitive field. When I was in 1959, 66, early 60s, even through the 70s, early 70s, it was just a little it was like a friendly business with Kleiner Perkins, Sutter Hill, Mayfield, and that was about it. What's his name? Arthur Rock was doing deals on his own, but we didn't really share deals much with him. But we did with the other three, two or three, and we had like magic. We're in the sunshine, the weather's great, the people are young and aggressive and bright, and it's not known as Silicon Valley, but we're sharing. It's a $4 million deal. We're going to take 2 at Sutter Hill. You want $1 million, and bring in Kleiner, and $1 million in Mayfield. And that would be, the deal would be done. They would do part of the homework. And I started to talk about homework. A lot of it is doing the diligence on the individual and the diligence on the market, and then trying to find some. I'm a history major, so on the technology, I'm a little, weak. But the thing I knew enough to do was to contact somebody who knew that particular territory very well. If it was chips, or network, or whatever it was, I would, try to get expert advice on it. But if you shared deals with the other venture firms, some of them had knowledge in those fields, and they'd do their homework in that regard, and we'd share it, and we'd make the right decision very often. As a result, the 20 years that I was with Sutter Hill, or in the venture business, before I went to Washington, I think our IRR was something like 18% at Sutter Hill over those 20 years. And that's pretty good. Today, in the venture world, it's about 1.8. And that might be a plus or a minus in front of it. It's just a much tougher business. I wondered what happened when the president of Goldman Sachs came into our little office on El Camino here. We were in a little office, and this guy came in and he said, he just wanted to get acquainted and see. And I thought, here's the president of Goldman Sachs in my little office. And at that time, I didn't realize that these returns of 18 or 19 or 20% were really all that impressive. But Wall Street began to realize that. And then the money came in. And they brought it by the barrel, by the wheelbarrow. They brought money in here so that, and then they'd start up a brand new company. Now I'm an advisor to NEA, New Enterprise Associates. There are 3 advisors, and mostly it's because of my international experience. And I'm good friends with the management. And they have, I don't know, they have 2 or 3 or 4 $billion funds. $1 billion. We didn't even know the word billion back in the days I was here. But we'd put in. So I'll explain how it all worked when in those days. No PowerPoints. I hate those, by the way. Everybody's looking here, and I want to look in the eyes of this entrepreneur and see what he's like and how he's responding. But we're all looking at these graphs and things like that. None of that. Activision came in. These 4 guys came in, and they said they wanted to start a company called Activision. And it sounded really interesting. It was games. I had no idea what was going to happen in the total industry, but so I said to all 4 of them, well, what do you want to do? Supposing this is a very, and it probably will be, very successful company, what do you want to do after that? And every one of them said, all I want to do the rest of my life is make games. And I thought, well, we've got the right guys to make games, but we need some management. So we went out and searched for a CEO, got a good one, and Activision took off. Then another guy, a team of 3 or 4 came in, and they wanted to start a company called Quantum Computer, Quantum, I don't know. And I said, well, which one of, they had no business plan. They just had 4 guys. We want to start a disk drive company and we're calling it Quantum. Oh, good. And who's going to be the president? Ooh, I don't know. We haven't talked about that. Jim, why don't you be president? You have the least to do. And that is how Jim got the job and stayed with it until it was a $2 billion. That was one that we got up to $2 billion company. Fun. It was just much more fun then than it is today, but it's still much more fun than any other business I can think of. I've been in the steel business. I would recommend you not go to India to become part of the steel industry. So it's so great. But I gotta say, like everybody my age thinks the real choice time was about 40 years ago. But in any event, we had a lot of fun. It worked. It was very profitable. And it was very exciting kind of business. None of us, even after we were, even when that guy from Goldman Sachs came out, none of us thought this was going to turn into the kind of thing that we see here in Silicon Valley today. Nobody could imagine. You can ask anybody. There were 4 or 5 of us on the platform together one night for dinner down at the Pacific Union Club. And it was Reed Dennis, Pitch Johnson, Bill Draper, and Bill Bowes. And we were all reminiscing, teasing each other and all that. But there isn't one of those guys who even pretended to know that it would be half what it's turned out to be. And the term Silicon Valley really didn't come along. I think it should have been called Terman Valley. We're here on the Stanford campus, and Fred Terman was the provost. Before that, he was dean of the engineering school at Stanford. And he's the one that gave Draper, Gaither, and Anderson a 99-year lease to come onto the property here. I don't know who figured out, because of course Mr. Stanford didn't want anybody to sell an acre of land very wisely, and they couldn't sell it, but they could lease it, they figured out. So we got a 99-year lease, which eventually, the Draper, Gaither, and Anderson closed up. My father went back to Washington. I only stayed with him for about 3 years, and it lasted only about 7 years. Did pretty well, but not great. Made money for all the limited partners, a couple of which, one was the Rockefellers, and another was Lazard Frere, investment banking firm, New York. Anyway, it was just the beginning. It was on Welch Road here, and I didn't like the name Welch Road because, everything's by handshake. And I thought, this is not such a good address. But in any event, then when Pitch Johnson and I started our company with an SBIC, thanks to the US government, they just announced this 3-for-1 leverage that they were willing to give if you invested in small companies. And we took advantage of it. I had about $25,000. He had about $25,000. We borrowed from the SBI, not directly, but into a corporation. So we weren't putting our family at risk. And so we had 75. No, 3 times 25 is 75. That's 100,000. And together we had 200,000. That's what we started Draper and Johnson on. Our first investment was about 60,000. And it was one of those, really good relationships. He and I are still very best friends. He came from Palo Alto, so that was neat. He knew a lot of friends, and when I got him out here to join me, he was delighted to leave the steel business, and I was just lucky to have a father that had figured out this was going to be an interesting area to start up an interest in a new industry, interesting industry. So anyway, we had, it was very informal, so that would be the best word to describe what it was way back then. It was very cooperative, friendly. It was warm. Today there are these billion-dollar funds and they're all competing. So the problem is a guy who starts a company, and by the way, there were no women in those days in any part. So we read about, Silicon Valley is not friendly to women. I don't think that's true. I think that it's just beginning, and I think women are much more an important part of the success of the future of the Valley, and because they got half the brains and half the energy and half of creativity and all that, and it's got to be tapped. So, but back then, it was just a non-starter. There was nobody, no entrepreneurs, no venture capitalists. It was all men. Sutter Hill, my old company, I don't like this, but they still they've yet to hire a woman, which bugs me a bit, because in the UN I really made a point of trying to encourage the development of women. But it was different in that respect. It was different in the idea of competition. There wasn't any, it was just, but for the entrepreneur, it wasn't so good, because if this little, little cooperative team of Kleiner and Sutter Hill and Mayfield turned them down, there wasn't much else to go to. Today, they just start at the top of Sand Hill Road and walk from one venture capital company to another and talk in the hundreds of millions instead of hundreds of thousands. We had and you drove down. Pitch and I, when we started out, we thought, well, gee, we got to go. No, we waited for the phone to ring for about a couple of days, and then realized that wasn't going to happen. And so we said we better lease a couple of cars. So we each leased a Pontiac, and we went down to Silicon Valley. Well, it was a bunch of trees and orchards and big barns. But if we'd see something, Electronics Incorporated or something, we'd knock on the door, and then this guy would come and say, "Hey, what do you want?" Oh no, the gal at the front desk would say, "What do you want?" "Well, we're venture capitalists." "Well, what's that?" And then we say, "Could we see the president, please?" We'll explain it to him. And he comes out and he says, "Well, what do you want?" "Well, we're venture capitalists." "Well, what's that?" And then we give money to companies and then take a minority position. Well, come right into my office. And we spent day after day doing that with all these little. So we got to know a lot about the Valley here. Again, it wasn't called Silicon Valley. So the businessmen in San Francisco had a couple of Wells Fargo and Bank of America, and a couple of modest-sized investment companies, Blythe and Company, and Handbrake Quist began to get started. So they all came to us because Pitch and I knew just about every orchard in Sunnyvale. So that's how we got started, and it was fun living. So the other thing as if you're going to be a venture capitalist, my advice is try to be first in some territory or other. Specialize, for example, perhaps in, I've got a grandson who's now a venture, that's the fourth generation, by the way. The reason I wrote the book was it was 3 generations, and I thought that's unique. I don't know anybody else that has 3 generations of venture capitalists in one industry like that. And so that's what got me started. Now we got a 4th generation. He's got a thing called Boost. It's an incubator in San Mateo, and he is really. I started to talk about specializing. He did like Y Combinator? Same kind of idea, but he thought, he got hot on the idea of Bitcoin. So he had a couple of Bitcoin companies that he had backed. They all, I think he buys like 6% of each company that he puts together with the other companies, and then they've got my son Tim has something called Draper University, which is the old Ben Franklin Hotel in San Mateo. If you got to go in there and see, because instead of this kind of arrangement, they've got a bunch of bean bags, and they have classes, and it's all about entrepreneurship, but also about creativity and taking a chance, and it's all about that. And their ages are 18 to 22, so it's either just before college, just after college, or they take a quarter off from college. It's an 8-week course. They teach it in spring, summer, and fall. Anyway, my grandson is right across the street, and you got to go see them because they've got, for example, it's fun to just see the inside of the building. It's very creative. They have a Tesla body as the receptionist sits in the front seat, and there's somebody, her assistant sits in the back seat. And there's no tires or no engine, but it's just Draper Fisher Jervison was the first investor in Tesla, and so they gave him this body, and it's like the desk thing. Anyway, he has his Boost incubator across the street, and my son has Draper University in this hotel, which he bought called Ben Franklin, and revamped it, and you got to go drop in just to get a picture. It's really a fun thing. I'd like to get you guys teaching there, not for a quarter, but for a quarter of an hour. No, but it's, oh, and if you teach there, if you go give a lecture for an hour, and then you go to their graduation ceremony, you'll get a PhD.
Well, that's pretty easy.
Yeah, I know, it's very easy. So I've got a PhD from Draper University. How about some questions before we break? Yeah.
You were talking a bit about your role as a board member, kind of being a friend and a coach. Have you encountered in your career other board members that were maybe part of the problem, that were obstacles to the company that you had to kind of deal with?
Not a lot, but definitely a few. And it's hard to get a guy off the board. The best solution working with the CEO, you may not have time to be the chairman of the board or not want to do it, but talk to him or her about getting a very strong board chair. And the two could come from the outside, could come from one of those board members that are already there, and then let him deal with that problem, or her. Let the board chair deal with that problem. And it does come up, and it is a difficult one. Being careful about selecting the board is another part of your coaching when if you're starting up brand new with 4 guys that want to start Activision. By the way, Activision, that CEO is pretty smart, the guy we got, because he always gave you the agenda. And, if you have too long a board meeting, people begin to look for problems or things to complain about. But at the bottom, the last item on every agenda was game time. So, of course, the board just couldn't wait to get through the agenda to get on to the next newest games. Yeah.
So you mentioned how much tougher the venture capital environment is nowadays. I'm curious, if you were to think about, if you were to start a VC fund nowadays, how would you think about designing the fund to navigate today's challenges?
How would I think about what?
Designing the fund to navigate and weather today's challenges.
Okay, that's a good question. Well, the first thing I do is look for about 2 or 3 guys or gals that were smarter than I was. That wouldn't be too hard. Then once I did that, and that I liked, and we were like a family, and make sure that they wanted to do the same thing, maybe had some experience with an investment banking firm or another venture capital company. And then I would, well, there are a lot of ways to do it. I mean, I like the very earliest stage, but truthfully, I would make the most money, I think, if I did it the way Andreessen, somebody worked for Andreessen here, yeah. And the way he has done it, which is go in later when the thing is already off the ground and a lot of stuff is shaken out, and then put a lot of money behind that little company, but it's still at a later stage. And those are two very different approaches to the same business, venture capital. So I'd have to decide how I was going to do it, because one, his program takes more money or fewer deals. I mean, either way. But just because the amount of money that they are willing to put in. Then the beauty of Andreessen's company is that Andreessen himself is a very experienced entrepreneur, very successful entrepreneur. So in those 3 or 4 people that I wanted to select, I would make sure that they had, some of them at least, had good entrepreneurial experience. Or some had been with small growing company. Make sure there's some good technology capability in the firm, and make sure, you know, that likable, so that putting myself, again, the empathetic way, putting myself in the shoes of somebody who might be an entrepreneur coming to that company. Well, would you really want to get venture capital from this team? In other words, did it look like a sophisticated team from the outside? Did it look like an empathetic team from the outside? So I wouldn't want somebody who was, you know, a son of a bitch. Yeah.
Curious of your thoughts as to whether or not we're observing a tech bubble right now, and the abundance of venture capital available has created a problem or not in the Valley, and are we going to see a market correction soon or not?
We will definitely see a market correction, yeah. When it comes is the problem, and I am not one to be able to predict that. But I would guess in the next 4 or 5 years, it'll definitely. Meanwhile, it's pretty good for venture capital right now, and for the entrepreneurs right now. But we're definitely going to see a market correction, yeah. And it'll be rough, you know, it'll come down. Robin and I went to India, as was said, and we got a couple of Indians there that helped us tee up deals, and then we'd go to India maybe every 3 weeks or something like that. And we'd stay for 2 weeks and then we'd come back. And very often they'd be a cross-border kind of company. And we started in 1994. She had just graduated from Stanford Business School. In fact, the day after she graduated, she and I took off for Asia, because we were not sure whether we would go to China, Hong Kong, even Indonesia. We looked at Vietnam, but we settled on India because they spoke English. Big. I mean, if you're doing a private investment through an interpreter, not so good. So I think we would have lost all our money if we'd gone to China. We were too small, and we would have gotten into trouble, I think. But in India, it all worked, and everything was working beautifully. And then it got to be the year 2000, and a little frothy. And we decided that we would bail out of everything. Really lucky, because we didn't know that. I mean, it wasn't that we thought this is going to blow up, really. It's just that, well, everything's, you know, let's cash in some of this stuff. As a result, we started the foundation. We had the money. Yeah, we had pulled it out of the market, and after some small public offerings and things like that. So it's timing is everything, as they say. And my father always, he was a conservative investment banker, but he always said, what goes up will come down. I mean, he had that attitude. But you can't, the people who really have succeeded in Silicon Valley don't think that way. What goes up will keep going up, and we're going to keep it going. And that's the best way. Optimists always do so much better than pessimists. Don't be a pessimist, or get out of business, you know. Become an author. It's very easy, by the way. All I did, I wrote it on vacations and on long airplane trips, and it's fun if you write about something you know about, you know, some of your own experience. It's very easy. It's fun, and I really recommend you won't find the time right away, but there'll be a time when there's a blank in your history, and I recommend every one of you write a book. It's rewarding, just in and of itself. Whether it gets published doesn't matter. It's just write it, and don't try to be too pontifical. Try to be, you know, just write about things you really know about. Good question. Yeah.
So you're one person who has exceptional international experience. I wonder whether you can talk more about changes that happen in the cross-border investment opportunities.
Whether I
You see any changes happening or new trends?
today versus then?
Yeah.
Yeah. The internet. Huge. God. So everybody knows everything. And as a result, something's invented here in Silicon Valley, and you know in Beijing they're going to have it 5 minutes later. So that's what's happening. Easier, though. That's the negative. The positive is that you can put something together, you know, really well. We had a problem in India with our fund because when it was, you know, 5 in the afternoon here, it was 5 in the morning there. So all our work day was they were sleeping. And we had a bit of a problem communicating with our two partners that way. Email, easy. Another thing that's different is that there are many, many more immigrants here. There were some, though, some Indians that had done pretty well. Something called the TIE, which I was one of the founding partners of. The Indus Entrepreneurs. And it's gotten to be a huge organization. It's all Indian, and well, they say it's not, that there's, you know, Bangladeshis or somebody else, but it's mostly Indian. And there were a few of them, and they, and some of them we got to be part of our India fund, limited partners. Kanwal Rekhi and Prabhu Goyal are two. So we had that slight connection. Today, you know, you just stumble on somebody that's from some other part of the world. And I always say in every talk I give, and I'll say it again, every other startup here in Silicon Valley has at least one entrepreneur in the founding, one immigrant in the founding team. And that's the good news. And then a lot of these people in Des Moines, Iowa, say, oh, they're stealing American jobs. And that's so crazy, because all you need to look at the history of Silicon Valley and the Googles and Facebooks and all those, and the jobs that they've created, not just in their own company, but the jobs that are related to those companies. So that I'm a great believer in encouraging a much more aggressive welcome to immigrants, and there are more, and so that makes it a little easier on communication or figuring out a good team if you want. And we did. We had a team. We often would have, let's say, a couple of research guys here, and let's say the CEO and an operating group in Bangalore, yeah, or Bombay, where we had 2 offices. But we were just lucky. A lot of life is luck. I mean, you guys know that. There's just a hell of a lot of luck. And it doesn't stop all through your life. Why did I make the trip down to this thing? And then all of a sudden something happens and changes everything. So I always like to say yes much more than you say no. So if somebody says, why don't you come over to Oakland and we'll hang out? Yeah, oh God, I don't want to go to Oakland. Why don't you come here? No, I can't do. Okay. Say yes much more than you say no. I'm not quite as strong about that with the young women in the audience, but anyway, I just think it's a much more positive. You're going to be a much more optimistic person, and you're just going to find magic happens. And it's called luck, but it's not really. It's because you said yes more than you said no. We got one or two more questions. Is that all right?
So just observing you right now, you seem like a very passionate and enthusiastic person.
Yeah.
And oftentimes as students and entrepreneurs, we don't perceive VCs to be that way today. And I was wondering, like, in your experience in the past and present, do you see a change in attitude among VCs or something that should be changed in the future?
You're in a way, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but when we were just getting started, we did have to reach out and tell people that we were in business and that come on and see us and get the word out. And so it took somebody a little bit more outgoing than it takes today because they know. On the other hand, it is more competitive, as I said, for venture capital. So if they're going to succeed, they better be outreaching and try and outdo the competition. I think it isn't quite fair to say that we were all happy-go-lucky guys and they were all, sort of green eye shade types. I don't think that's fair because I know in both, but there weren't too many green eye shade guys back when I knew because they were all working for big companies in a safe, secure cubicle. One more question, huh? Yeah, there it is.
If you had to pick one thing that you think most entrepreneurs don't know before starting a company but should.
If I had to pick one thing that most entrepreneurs
don't know before starting a company but should, what would that be?
The honest truth to that, I think they don't know how good women can be for their operation. I really mean that. I really mean that because they're a balance, first of all, in approach, in the way they see things. It's hard to generalize, obviously, and there are all kinds of people on both sides of the spectrum. But I would say that is what I would tell. That's what I tell my partners at Sutter Hill. But they're, Draper, you've been there. You're out of here. You're an old man. We're running this place. Forget it. But there is so much talent that can be developed. And I'm glad it's kind of on the front pages about Silicon Valley because I think it's appropriate. And that's what I tell them. Thank you all very much. Great to be with you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.